Hello. Can everyone hear me? All right. Thanks, Doug. Round of applause for Doug. I feel the community feeds him, but vice versa. Like, thank you so much for your years of devotion and wonderfulness. So as you can probably tell, I'm Andrew McGregor, and I'm going to tell a story about how teaching journalism in Central African refugee camps led to inventing a sport in North America, which led to inventing a robot that can map landmine fields. And it'll all make a lot of sense, and I think it's all part of a singular beat that hopefully we can all jam on. So, that's me. That's my fighting moniker, which will come in, the fighting philanthropist. But we'll get right to it. All right, so a few years ago, I had started an organization that it's called the Tiziano Project, and we teach journalism to people living in difficult and dangerous parts of the world. The moral impetus for this is how can we have life now where we have YouTube and genocide going on at the same time. So our solution to that is to teach people in kind of the difficult parts how to do journalism, and then with these new media tools they can get the story out while creating jobs for themselves that support their families. So we began Rwanda, and we were having some difficulties, but it was a wonderful time, and our students said, you really need to go to Eastern Congo because that's where the violence is. So we did, and I began teaching journalism in these refugee camps that are in Congo. And a little bit of background on the war, the current war in Congo. It's estimated that about 5.5 million people have died, mostly civilians and women and children, as kind of an ancillary consequence of the fighting, just the general destabilization. But the country's also vastly wealthy. Like the majority of the world's uranium supplies and something called coltan, which is fundamental for a lot of video game and electronics components, is also there. So kind of what happens is someone will give a militia money to just kind of keep the mines going, and they'll kill and rape and do whatever they want, and then the minerals get extracted and then just dispersed throughout the world. So this economic situation has led to something where there's not really a political solution possible because the country's so wealthy that people will just fight over it. So it's this entrenched tragedy. Anyway, so I was also working as a photojournalist for the wire services, and once I was in the country, I embedded with the United Nations, who were doing a food drop-off to this group of people in a camp that hadn't been fed for 6 weeks. And so this is kind of on the way to the camp. If you can kind of imagine behind those mountains that there was active fighting and gunshots going on, stuff like that. And the refugees are streaming against the traffic of the UN vehicle to try to get to the border. So I was doing this and submitting to the wire services, and that's me. A lot of the UN soldiers around the world are Indian, which I think a lot of people don't understand, but yeah, the UN military forces are largely from India. So once we got to the town, it was engaged in active fighting. This guy had been shot through the chest during a battle nearby, and basically, yeah, so someone just started to mortar the city. So we got stuck there after the food had dropped off. So the war really, really escalated around us. But no one was trying to take a hill, because again, it's just this constant and random carnage, and rape is very common just as a weapon or because people are bored. So I was in there this was taken at a Doctors Without Borders clinic, and then the violence kept escalating. It was just like a random explosion, and it was just terrifying. And so eventually someone instigated a riot with children who were, this was taken before the riot, but you can kind of see it building up. Who were wielding machetes, and initially the riot went against the UN, but the UN kind of repelled them because they have a base there. But then all the kids with machetes tried to attack me, or just wow. Not me specifically, but I was known to be a foreigner who was with the UN, even though I wasn't with the UN because I'm a journalist. And then I'm about to play you an audio clip of local police shooting at the children who were also trying to kill me, and it was just a horrifying experience. Okay, so that's kind of what a low-level gun battle sounds like. So the experience really left me shell-shocked, and upon my return to Los Angeles, my emotional spectrum had shifted, so I just couldn't feel emotions. So unless it was like a kid waving a gun at me, I just couldn't feel anything. So normal things that cause fear and panic, like someone almost hitting you in traffic, I just was dead. And it's kind of like losing a sense, you know? You can't function, it harms your relationships, and I would like fake laughter just to kind of fit in with my friends, but you know, that just made it worse because I'm like, oh, I'm so damaged. And I was really struggling with it, and it's hard because it's not like you can talk your way out of it, like, you know, kind of talk therapy, like, oh, father had these issues, and I felt unloved, and this did that. Like, cool, I get it. It almost has kind of like a neurological cleave to it. So I was kind of struggling and desperate and damaged, and I remembered something I learned about years earlier before Congo called chess boxing. So it gets a little lighter from here. So basically, chess boxing was invented as a graphic novel written by a Serbian emigre who's now in Paris, and the title translates to Cold Equator. But in the initial graphic novel, they had 11 rounds of boxing followed by a 4-hour chess match. And then the inventor of the sport just like combined them so the rounds alternated, chess, boxing, chess, boxing, chess. And it was kind of a hit. It was big in Berlin, and I just like read about it and been fascinated by it. And I had done chess competitively growing up. So I was like, all right, just need to box. And again, like in that state of mind, I was just like, I'm gonna do it. So in the course of doing this, I became quite good. But first I needed to know how to learn how to box, because it is a difficult skill that's not easily accessible. So what I did is I wrote an email to George Foreman. And where this gets magical is George wrote me back. And it was this very concise, like three-paragraph thing of how to become a champion boxer. And just to take a step back, when I do something, when I look for a hero, I was like, you know, which boxer am I like? Is it Lennox Lewis? I'm like, Mike Tyson's like, oh, the murder. But then it's like George, you know? 9 kids named George and a successful line of grills. I'm like, yeah, that's my boy. So after George Foreman sent me an email, I basically took it as an act of God, like, go forth and box. So I did, and to kind of condense a lot of, you know, fighting and violence and chessing, the piece on the right is LA Weekly just named me one of the 40 most fascinating people in Los Angeles. Woo, woo. Right. Exactly. And the article on the right is I was profiled in the sports section of the New York Times. And I basically became the king of chess boxing, which is to become the king of something most people don't believe exists. But it does exist if you do it, which is fundamental to what we're talking about tonight. So, after I became the king of something that most people don't believe exists and was featured in the New York Times and LA Weekly, I was also invited to a chess tournament, including RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan and lots of hip-hop luminaries. And so since I was already the king, I have lots of crowns. People started making me crowns. So king just isn't metaphor, you know. You can't be a king without a crown, so you got to accessorize. Anyway, so I met all these hip-hop luminaries and met with RZA, and we decided, because all the chess boxing I do is for charities, because it was my cure for being shell-shocked, I want to kind of have people fight for something greater than themselves. So that's the ethos of the sport I invented in North America, and we decided to partner with this group called the Hip Hop Chess Federation, and they're in the Bay Area, they do great kind of after-school chess programs and also jiu-jitsu programs, so we decided to invent the sport of chess jiu-jitsu to help fund for chess programs in local high schools in South Central, where they're now teaching. And so that led to inventing a new sport with RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan, and how did this all happen? And basically, because to me it is magical. It was just like, no man, George Foreman told me to do it. But then Dougie's like, come on, there's something here, McGregor. It's about creating institutions, ultimately. And the way you create an institution is through cherishing your community. It's fundamentally based in love. But an example of this is like the LA Chess Boxing Club keeps going because I'm teaching veterans now. I'm teaching people who were shell-shocked in the armed services, and now they come to me, they're like, yo, I heard your story. And, you know, because war trauma is a unique trauma, and they're like, can you do to me what you did to you? And the fighting community is very supportive. So in this way, the LA Chess Boxing Club is now an institution, and it's a resource that bridges people together, and that people can come around and they can just greatly improve their lives and move on. But this methodology also works in a few of my other endeavors. which I'm going to tell you about now. This is the not-for-profit I told you about in the beginning that I started with some buddies, and we started in Rwanda, and then we started in Congo. But then the organization's worked all over the world. It's worked in Iraq, it's worked in Indian reservations in Arizona, it's worked in South Central, and it's all because of that community. But how this began is I started a not-for-profit with misappropriated student loan money, and we flew to Central Africa with a couple buddies. But again, it's about that cherishing that community and taking care of your people. I mentioned this last month, but basically I was a judge on a film festival that showcases benevolent human-machine interactions. I'm also a filmmaker, so I was like, well, I've seen kids who've been blown up by landmines. How can we use machines to help those kids? And I wrote a screenplay with the hope of inspiring engineers to create that solution. But in the process of making the screenplay, we had into a movie, we had a working prototype. And now that we have a working prototype, it's become a company. And I'm presenting this work at the United Nations next month as a magic. It's just like a collaborative solution to help people in places like Cambodia and Angola like rid themselves of their own landmines. But again, it was just like the movie and taking care of people, and voila. Good Bar. You guys are going to love this. Basically, this is another thing I'm starting with a dear, dear friend who's in the audience tonight you should talk to, and we should have a cheers to cherry afterwards. But it's a bar, and it functions exactly like a bar, except all the profit goes to charity. So, imagine like how much money you spend on a Friday night versus like the charitable fundraisers you may go to, or like the online petitions. What if like all your Friday night fun or your like breakup after party just went to charity? It'll change everything. So we're starting with a downtown location, probably in the fall. And yeah, it's called Good Bar. It's just a normal bar. All revenue goes to charities, mostly local, 20% national, and then 10% international. So we'll have a toast to charities afterwards. But yeah, that's another organization I'm starting that literally just started like, guys, what are we doing? I don't know. What if this all went to charity? Cool, cheers. That was magic. All right, this is another thing I do. It's called graphation. And basically, we now make comic books, and each comic book benefits an associated charity. Those are some of our titles and the covers. But basically, this started as a film festival for like short but awesome small films, because we've all seen these things on Vimeo and stuff like that. So we made a film festival to kind of showcase these brilliant things. And in the course of doing the film festival, again, the community was forged. And just by like fostering that love and that kind of concern within the community, the film festival transmogrified, big up to Calvin Hobbes, into a comic book company that's now kind of seen over the world. And like our character Captain Africa, he's Caucasian, and so that was like controversial in America. But in South Africa, the people born in South Africa, he's popular because they never had like a Caucasian superhero who can fight for Africa. Right? Even though Africa's their home. So we've added all these like kind of interesting things as the ideas of comics for charity have like spread around the world. I Was a Teenage Zombie supports hunger charities and stuff like that. All right, so another thing I do, after I was fortunate enough to speak about three TEDx events, I was like, we can make our own. And we now have TEDx Pacific Palisades. So that's another wonderful community. We're deeply involved with the local high school. Where we hosted the first event, and because we did the TEDx event there, that local high school wrote a grant to MIT with the robot I invented as the basis of it. So now the landmine robot is going to be the basis of Pali High's advanced robotics class in the coming fall, and that was because of the community from TEDx Pacific Palisades. So that's just another way that by cherishing and fostering your community, you literally can build institutions. But there's more to it, Grasshopper. So like what works and what's the motivation? And so for me, I find a lot of people get flustered with like, why am I doing this? Or why am I alive even? And so I think inspiration itself is the inspiration. It's this kind of contained entity in the ether. And to showcase this point, there was a moment in an art gallery down the street called The Hive, it's in downtown obviously, where Cookie Monster appeared out of nowhere, and I hugged Cookie Monster, as I'm doing right now, and a friend photographed that. I just thought that was the most beautiful thing, that like, Cookie Monster appears and you hug Cookie Monster, and like, what motivation do you possibly need? Beyond like that moment of Cookie Monster appears and you hug him, and it's like, inspiration is inspiration. And then the other kind of axiom I want to convey is that value is even more valuable than value. Because that's another thing I think that flusters people is like, what's the worth of the thing. And so several of my students in East Africa are now really high up with the Associated Press. They have brilliant careers, but this is like significant in that context because there's such strong poverty that would make that really unlikely that someone I teach in Mogadishu would then, have a top job with the Associated Press. And so that's, it's priceless, but it is. It's value beyond value. And so that's another way I kind of evaluate things, and I decide, what to do to help these communities become institutions. Cool. And then another thing I think it's important psychologically is to dedicate yourself to the practice of being what you are. And so for me, this is the difference between just playing tennis and becoming a tennis player. And becoming a tennis player obviously requires that discipline, but once you are a tennis player, you can become that institution, right? You can open your own school of tennis mastery, and that institution will bridge people who are just playing tennis. So it's an important kind of existential and psychological determination to make, but I think it's really useful when you're doing this kind of stuff. And then something else I want everyone to consider is how much reality do you consume compared to the reality you create? And this ties into my comic book company, because what we'll do is, and some of these people are probably in the audience tonight, I think there are superheroes all around us. It's my kind of non-paranoid scheme, and that these superheroes should be cherished and supported. So what I'll do is I will turn them into comic books with our artists. And I've noticed that has this profound psychological effect, because that becomes your mirror. If you think of how much time you spend staring at your Facebook avatar, what if your Facebook avatar is a superhero? Inspiration becomes the inspiration, right? You're like, aha, I actually am this person, even though this thing has been imagined. So that's a case of creating reality rather than kind of being a passive consumer, to be actively engaged in your own superhero-ness and in the creation of your own realities. And then another point within this is that brilliance is democratic. I don't think brilliance is kind of this intrinsic genius thing. I think it's a spark that gets turned through the acts of habituation, through the practicing of the awesomeness that you are, into an actual flame. And once it's a flame, it becomes visible to the entire world, and it warms us all. So brilliance is democratic. Brilliance is something you can practice and forge through habit. And then to conclude, I just want you to all know that you can make your story a reality, and then it will be a truth we can all share. So by kind of practicing these disciplines of creative institution building, your story, however you choose to forge it, then becomes a reality. And once it's a reality, it becomes the truth, and we can all share and jam on that together. And I think that's the most sublime thing there is. Thank you all. Thank you, Doug. Bless Mindshare.